Good morning. I'm at camp along the Snake River, upstream from Snake River Canyon at a campsite. And last night I heard wolves going at it. Not as much as I often do in other parts of the park, but there were clearly a pack of wolves, large, not super large, sounded like maybe a dozen animals out there. And they were talking to each other and letting each other know where they were and whether there was game available and so forth. That reminded me of a story not too far from here. Park boundary is about 2 miles away, and there's some popular backcountry wilderness hunting in season. I'm here during bow hunting season in Wyoming, and which is September, and then firearms hunting is November, when it gets quite crispy and cold. Well, as you may know, Yellowstone reintroduced wolves to the park in 1995. The lead agency on that project was actually the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it was led by John Turner, who happens to be a local rancher and dude rancher. So he is the kind of person who takes guests out to these wilderness places as well as places closer in. So 1995, Fish and Wildlife Service is reintroduces wolves. They'd been planning it for quite a while. And one reason was that there were no wolves. Now, there had been reports of wolves for decades. They tended to be individual wolves, but there were occasional reports of 2, 3, 4 wolves. And the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service were not keen on there being wolves here, because if there were any, they were at too small a number to be ecologically meaningful. And so they tended to brush aside these reports and claim that these were just isolated dispersing wolves that had not established a stable population. And it's true. If they had established a stable population, we would have seen a lot more of them. But a local sheep rancher, Cat Urbicide, who was in favor of wolves, also believed that the wolves were there and needed to plan that way. And she's actually the one that collected data of sightings and possible sightings. So that's the background for a story. It took place about 3-4 miles from here in the Fox Creek Basin. A local hunter, Jerry Kaiser, was glassing the basin looking for elk during elk hunting season, and he saw a large canid at a great distance, and he, like everybody else, he thought there were no wolves, and so he saw this thing and assumed it was a coyote, looked at it at a long distance and thought it was a coyote. And in Wyoming, coyote or vermin, you can shoot them at any time for any reason, and it's not unusual to shoot them for sport. So he figured he'd just take a shot, practice shot, and he ended up killing the animal. Well, you can probably guess where this story is going. It was not a coyote, it was a wolf. In fact, it was a 92-pound male wolf. And being a good citizen, Jerry Kaiser went over to the National Park Service patrol cabin nearby and reported the kill. And then Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service came over, collected the animal and brought it back to a facility for study to see whether this was a crime scene, because it was illegal to kill wolves. They were on the endangered species list locally, not nationally. So Jack Turner, head of the Fish and Wildlife Service, who knows the place, came out, looked at the thing and said, "That's a wolf." And other people in the Fish and Wildlife Service really wanted it to be a coyote, as was also true of Yellowstone. And so, you never see a 92-pound coyote. So that actually sat in a facility for about 90 days. Jerry Kaiser was subject to charges for killing an animal illegally. And eventually they did in fact identify it and confirm that it was a wolf. And instead of bringing charges, they accepted his misidentification and good faith shot at a coyote. which makes sense. I mean, the agencies had been telling everybody there were no wolves, so there was no way that he could have known that there was a wolf and did not consider it a possibility. This little story illustrates how organizations, including federal agencies, but all organizations, often develop what's sometimes called groupthink, and then act on it. So nobody was collecting the data on wolves because they were sure there were no wolves. Therefore, they had no evidence of wolves, and therefore they couldn't be telling people that there were small numbers of wolves out there. Shortly after the wolves were introduced, I saw a wolf in Grand Teton National Park, which was quite a ways from the reintroduction site. Reported it to a ranger. The ranger said, there are no wolves in Grand Teton National Park. Didn't take very long, a couple of years, and then they did see them. So it was just an example of assuming that a tourist could not tell the difference between a wolf and a coyote. And that was consistent with an agency mission. So when you think about politics of national parks, you can keep in mind the story of Jerry Kaiser and his wolf kill, where there weren't supposed to be any wolves. And about 3 miles or so from here.